in the moment that we're in, it's important to stress that the amount of stuff used in making solar panels is small compared to how we do things at the moment. There's no free lunch, but there are wildly less expensive lunches. And even in its current state of development, the solar panel and the lithium-ion battery are so much more efficient in their use of materials than digging up coal and setting it on fire, drilling for gas and setting it on fire, that the difference is orders of magnitude.
Welcome to the Garrison Institute Presents The Common Good. I'm Jonathan F.P. Rose, the co-founder of the Garrison Institute. This series begins with a simple, essential truth, that we are all deeply interconnected. Every breath we take, every drop of water, every act of kindness or cruelty ripples through the vast web of life we share. The Garrison Institute was founded on the belief that by deepening our awareness of that interconnection, we can begin to shape a world that is more compassionate, resilient, and just. In each episode, I'll speak with extraordinary thinkers, scientists, and visionaries. Together, we'll explore what it means to serve the common good in our time, and how, acting through wisdom and compassion, we can help weave a more beautiful and enduring fabric of life for all. Today, we are so honored to welcome environmental writer, teacher, activist, and visionary Bill McKibben. He's the founder of 350.org and Third Act. For more than 3 decades, he's sounded the alarm on climate change and has been at the forefront of exploring how the climate crisis intersects with questions of justice, democracy, and interdependence. We'll explore how the climate crisis is reshaping the world for humans and all species, what a solar-powered civilization might look at, and how deep transformation calls for both practical solutions and spiritual courage. We'll discuss Bill's great new book, Here Comes the Sun, and ask how the journey towards clean energy can serve the common good, foster justice, and connect us at every level of life. Welcome, Bill.
What a pleasure to be with you, friend.
Thank you. Thank you. I thought we would start with your own history. Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in the golden state of California, and my earliest memories are from a home in Altadena under the mountains, a home that burned down in the Altadena fire this spring. But I grew up mostly in the suburbs outside Boston, in fact, in the town of Lexington, birthplace of American liberty, where I spent my summers giving tours of the battle green to tourists and telling over and over again the story of the beginning of the American Revolution.
And did you feel a connection with nature then?
Yes, I've always loved the outdoors. My father was a great hiker, and when he'd been in California in his youth, he was an early and vociferous member of the Sierra Club, though in those days it was more a hiking club than an environmental organization. But people like David Brower were icons in our family. But truthfully, by the time I was out of college and at work, my first job was at the New Yorker magazine, I really thought I'd spend more of my life working on urban issues. I wrote a lot about homelessness, which was then a new and novel crisis, spent a fair amount of time living on the street as a homeless person to write about it, ran a homeless shelter in my church, and those are still issues that are of real importance to me. I then did a long piece for the New Yorker about where everything in my apartment came from. I would have been 23 or 24 at the time. I ended up in Brazil looking at oil wells, and in the Arctic looking at hydroelectric dams, and in the Grand Canyon looking at uranium mines to trace all the kind of physical connections to my apartment. And that long piece, which ran in the New Yorker and got turned into a Nova special and things, I think set me up over the next couple of years to be reading the very earliest climate science, really, and understanding it at a different level than I otherwise would have. I came away from that piece with a strong sense of the fragility of human arrangements, the degree to which they depended on the working of the planet's physical systems, even in a place as rich and seemingly able to mint money out of thin air as Manhattan, And I think that allowed me to understand early on that this was going to be the most important story in the world. When I wrote The End of Nature at the age of 27, it was the first book about any of this for a general audience, and somehow knew really that I'd stumbled across the most important story that was going to dominate my lifetime, and that I cared about the outcome of that story, that I wasn't really fit anymore to be a completely objective beat reporter about it, that my journalism would have to take somewhat other forms, and eventually, of course, evolved into also the kind of activism that's been my volunteer avocation for the last quarter century or so.
I remember when The End of Nature came out and what a massive effect it had, how it certainly rippled through the environmental community. And I also remember that there was a sense of sadness in the idea because it really called upon us to have to look into the mirror of the extraordinary negative impact that our human civilization was having.
There's no question that the tone of that book was more sadness even than fear, partly because the actual effects of climate change hadn't yet kicked in. It was more a prospective look at what this was going to mean physically, yes, but also kind of spiritually and morally, that we had overwhelmed all the systems of the earth, and really there was no such thing as wild nature quite anymore.
We now know indigenous cultures have long had a interdependent relationship with nature and a curating relationship with nature, that even in the Amazon, that if there are humans there, there's a co-evolving relationship. But it was a relationship of respect and reciprocity, and there was a mental shift that happened.
But even in those parts of the world where humans aren't, in the very highest Arctic, on the Antarctic, whatever, we're now in control of what happens. It's a new place in some ways for humans, this totalizing effect.
It's a new place, and it's a place in which we are handling the powers and responsibilities immaturely. Another book amongst the 20 that you've written is Deep Economy. And I'd love to, at some point, you recognized that it was the economic forces that were actually driving some of these factors. So I'd love to get your thoughts about that.
Deep Economy was really a look at a subject that remains important to me, whether economic growth, which has been the raison d'etre of our government and governments around the world, really the organizing principle of our societies for the last century, whether or not that's as useful a goal as we think. And I think not. I think it does not bring us the happiness that it promises. That said, I don't think that in the short run, we're likely to abandon consumerism as a guiding force on this planet. I think that would be a slender reed on which to rest our hopes for an environmentally workable future. About 100 million humans join the consuming class every year on this planet, mostly in Asia. And I think the chances that they will not follow us down the paths we have blazed in the short run is small. Hence the need to also alter our technology so it doesn't destroy our planet even as it meets our desires and needs.
And the place where I see the most interesting openings is in this idea of bioregional finance. As globalization begins to fall apart, and as there are places that are the left behind places like Appalachia and parts of the mid-Hudson Valley, et cetera, it feels to me like the places where the big money doesn't care about it anymore are the places in which we can actually perhaps bring transformational models that, by the way, I'm resurrecting a term that E.F. Schumacher used called meta-economics. And is there a much more whole systems view of economics that we can begin to bring to at least certain bioregions?
Absolutely. I think humans are complicated, interesting species, and I think that 100 years from now, the idea that we'll amuse ourselves in quite the ways we have for the last 50 years, with a constant emphasis on consumerism and things, I think that's unlikely. But do I think it's going to change a lot in the next 4 or 5 years? which is the time frame in which we need to be ending our flood of carbon into the atmosphere? I don't think so. I think it's a longer term project than that, one that I'm happily engaged in. And, that's sort of my life here in Vermont in certain ways. But the physics of climate change enforces a certain brute reality. This is the first timed test that we've ever come up against. And that limits some of the options that we have, I think.
This brings us to Here Comes the Sun. And what you're describing, though, is something amazing. So tell us what you found in Here Comes the Sun.
The last 36 months has been a kind of inflection point, perhaps in human civilizations. There's been this sudden, massive surge in the use of energy from the sun and wind to power our societies. We're suddenly on the very steep part of an S curve in places around the world, and the numbers are just remarkable. California, which took this more seriously than the rest of the country, has reached a tipping point of some kind. Most days now, California supplies 100% of the electricity it uses from renewable sources for long stretches of the day. At night, the biggest source of supply to the grid now is usually batteries that have been soaking up excess sunshine all afternoon. Bottom line, California, fourth largest economy on Earth, is using 40% less natural gas to produce electricity than they were 2 years ago. That kind of shift and pace is the kind of thing that allows us not to stop global warming. It is much too late for that, but allows us to start shaving tenths of a degree off how hot this planet gets. And every tenth of a degree that we raise the temperature moves about another 100 million people from a comfortable climate zone to a dangerous one. So that's crucial work. Were it California alone, it would be an interesting and a hopeful example, but California is actually trailing the real leader here, which is China. China, in the last 3 years, has transformed itself into not a petrostate, but the world's first electrostate. The numbers are staggering. May, last month for which we have good numbers, China was adding 3 gigawatts of solar panels a day, a gigawatt being the rough equivalent of a large coal-fired power plant. So China was building one of those with solar panels every 8 hours. And not only are they building the supply of clean, cheap energy, they're also figuring out the suite of appliances, as it were, to make use of all of that. 50% of the cars bought in China last month came with a plug dangling out the back. I haven't been to China in the last couple of years, but by many accounts from friends over there, Chinese cities are noticeably quieter than they were a couple of years ago. Their smog is way, way down. They're no longer the dirtiest cities in the world, and they're exporting this new technology far and wide. We're used to thinking of Detroit as the center of the automotive industry, but in fact, it's now 2 or 3 cities in China whose names are hard for me to pronounce that are building the best and cheapest cars on the planet, and especially around the developing world, beginning to own that industry. So this is transformative. It's transformative in economic terms. We're ceding the technological future to China, but it's also transformative in other ways too. This is not merely a small technological change. It's potentially a deeply liberating change, I think, to allow the planet to rely on energy that's available to everyone everywhere instead of being the province of a few people with control of a few deposits of fossil fuel.
Whenever we can follow the lessons of nature, we're better off. And how does nature work? Essentially, everything starts with photosynthesis, all of energy, everything, even when we eat animals, it all goes back to photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a completely globally distributed system.
Jonathan, I think you're so right. And if you think about it even in broader sense, the sun is the most charismatic object in our universe. It already gives us warmth and light, and via photosynthesis, it underwrites our food supply. And now it's willing to provide all the power that we could ever need. And, the human ingenuity in figuring out how to capture that is quite remarkable. The first solar cell emerges in 1954 in Edison, New Jersey. from Bell Labs, and in just 70 years is now transforming the world. Since you're very right to point out the miracle of photosynthesis, one of the things to really wrap your mind around here is how much more efficient this direct capture of sunlight is. I was standing in a cornfield in Illinois last summer with a farmer who's taking some of his acreage and using it for solar arrays. And he was pointing to me an acre of corn and saying, this gets turned into ethanol, which happens to half the corn crop in America. It produces in an acre in a year enough ethanol to drive my Ford F-150 about 25,000 miles. And he turned to the adjacent field, another acre, now with solar panels on it. He said, that field, 1 acre, produces enough electrons in the course of a year to drive Ford F-150 Lightning, the EV version of the same pickup, not 25,000 miles, but 700,000 miles. 20 times increase in the efficiency of the conversion. So this is remarkable stuff that we've been gifted. And the question is not whether we will use it. It makes so much sense that we will eventually make it the underpinning of our economy. The question is whether we'll use it fast enough to allow us to escape from the very worst of climate change or not. Look, 30 years from now, we'll run the planet on sun and wind. It's that cheap. But if it takes us 30 years to get there, then the planet we run on sun and wind will be a broken one and beyond repair. We don't have a plan to refreeze the Arctic once we've melted it.
There's several angles on the economics I want to get into, but first, I want you to give the example of Pakistan because part of this is, in absence of government policy, it's a beautiful example of, in effect, self-help.
Pakistan, deep victim of climate change, but set that aside for a moment, also has an unreliable and expensive electric grid. And so being positioned directly next to China, it was the perfect place for a kind of natural experiment. Pakistanis began importing huge numbers of cheap Chinese solar panels about a year ago. And then using not government direction or anything, using TikTok videos with Hindustani music in the background, they figured out how to put these on the roofs of tens of thousands of apartments, shopping malls, factories. In 8 months, Pakistanis built the equivalent of half their national electric grid, just like that. Astonishing. Early adopters were Pakistani farmers. You've traveled in rural Asia, so you know that the soundtrack of that part of the world is the hum or cough of diesel pumps bringing up irrigation water from the deep tube wells that are residue legacy of the Green Revolution. That diesel for those pumps is often the most expensive input for a small farmer. So these guys were early adopters. They often lacked the money to build the metal stanchions that we're used to seeing supporting solar panels. They just laid them on the ground and pointed them at the sun. Pakistani farmers used 35% less diesel last year than they had the year before. That same thing is now beginning to happen across much of Africa. Any place where there are strong Chinese trade networks at this point, that flood of cheap solar panels is starting to show up. Truthfully, I think in a sane world, Jonathan, we would spend the next 5 years, in essence, globalizing those Chinese and now Indian solar panel factories, just paying to run them 24/7, churning out solar panels. And probably we should just leave piles of them on every wharf and railroad siding on planet Earth so that people can come pick them up and go and do with them what they will.
You probably know that we in Texas and Arizona, actually, there are several Chinese companies that are pumping groundwater to cool huge data centers that create almost no jobs, that use our electricity and are creating Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, which are then exported to China. So we are investing our precious national resources to give them Bitcoin.
Absolutely.
You could reverse this and say, so we have a shortage of rare earth, and China is willing to subsidize and sell us cheap solar panels from which we could create an incredible, reliable electric system. Instead of us subsidizing China, why would we want China to subsidize us?
I love it, man. I love it. As an American with some remaining sense of patriotism, just the idea that we're handing over the future to China and China alone is painful. Given that we invented all this stuff here. I mean, there's that early first solar panel. The first wind turbine, commercial wind turbine in the world was 30 miles south of my house in Vermont in the 1940s. we should be a big player in this revolution instead of what we're doing at the moment, which is trying to push it back with everything Trump can muster.
So I want to talk about the economics of this. So I'm going to give you a couple pieces of information. So we know that the big energy companies have said, we understand this is nice stuff, but it's not a good enough return on investment, right?
Yep. Doesn't offer above average returns for our investors.
Over the last 10 years, if you had bought ExxonMobil stock 10 years ago, you would have achieved a 54.44% increase in value. If you had bought First Solar, you would have achieved a 325% increase in value. If you had bought Next Energy, a 202% increase in value. If you had bought Iberdrola, Wind Power, or Vesta, every single one of them, you would have made multiples of what you would have made in Exxon.
If you just bought the S&P without, X fossil fuel, you would have made more money because this has been the lowest performing sector in the economy.
Exactly. So what you're really seeing is not smart economics on the part of the oil companies. What you're seeing is that they're stuck in a worldview. They're stuck in a mindset. They're stuck in a culture, which is not only super harmful to the earth, but is actually harmful to their investor, their shareholders too.
They've got trillions of theoretical dollars in oil reserves. And like Gollum, they're down there underground, unwilling to let go of the ring,
So there's a mental model, a worldview model that actually we are, and all our futures are being held hostage to. And unfortunately, it's a false model.
Absolutely right. A very astute observation.
But making of solar panels does use toxic chemicals. It does use a lot of energy. Have you followed the idea of biological photovoltaics?
Yeah, a little bit. But I think that in the moment that we're in, it's important to stress that the amount of stuff used in making solar panels is small compared to how we do things at the moment. There's no free lunch, but there are wildly less expensive lunches. And even in its current state of development, the solar panel and the lithium-ion battery are so much more efficient in their use of materials than digging up coal and setting it on fire, drilling for gas and setting it on fire, that the difference is orders of magnitude. The Rocky Mountain Institute said last year that all the mining we have to do for the battery transition between now and 2050 is less than the volume of coal we pulled out of the ground last year. So it's really good to talk about what we can do in the future with even better, more interesting, say, solar technology, but it shouldn't in any way be a brake on doing what we can't do right now.
No, I totally agree with that. So we're consistently figuring out how to make things better. Your contributions to this are fantastic. The book is amazing, and the article in the New Yorker. To amplify this message, you've declared September 21 Sunday. So I'd love you to talk about Sunday.
Absolutely. Sunday is going to be a lot of fun. It's the fall equinox, so the right day to do this. And there'll be hundreds and hundreds of events all across the country, all aimed at partly at just driving home the message that this is no longer to be thought of as alternative energy. It's the obvious, common sense, straightforward path to the future, but also designed to help local and state officials, since we can't get anything done in Washington for the moment, smooth the path for the deployment of clean energy. And there's tons to be done there, Jonathan. It costs 3 times as much to put a solar panel on your roof in the US as it does in Australia or the EU. It's not because of the cost of panels. That's a marginal difference. It's because we have 15,000 municipalities with 15,000 building codes and 15,000 teams of inspectors and things. It takes months often to get this stuff done. Whereas in the rest of the world, you just call up your contractor on Monday and by Friday, it's up there on the roof pumping out power. We can change that. There's an easy technical fix. The National Renewable Energies Laboratory a couple of years ago gave us something called the Solar App Plus, which allows for instant permitting for contractors. When they plug the equipment they're going to use into a computer, it says fine. California, Maryland, and New Jersey already mandate its use, but that leaves 47 states to go. Another example, for apartment dwellers, this thing we're calling balcony solar millions of Europeans have gone to their, whatever their equivalent of Best Buy is, plunk down a couple €100 and come home with a solar panel designed not to be put on the roof, but just to be hung from the balcony of their apartment and then plugged straight into the wall with a standard plug, often producing 25% of the power that home uses. That's illegal everywhere in the US except the state of Utah, which passed enabling legislation a couple of months ago because a state legislator said, why should the people of Stuttgart get to do this and not the people of Provo? And no one had a good answer, so now they can. And YouTube is filled with videos of happy Utahns putting in their new balcony solar. These are the kind of things that we can do, red state and blue, without the help of Washington right now to continue as much as we can, keeping America on the same path as the rest of the world here.
I really want to underscore the importance of this. My company builds very green, affordable housing, and we also buy existing affordable housing and make it green. And our solar projects are way backed up in permitting, in reviews, this idea that you can't plug something in, all that we have to wrestle with every day. Also, yes, there have been some battery fires, but now the whole new codes that are being imposed on batteries, it is a friction point that is slowing down the adaptation of a greener, safer, cheaper form of energy that we need to accelerate. And so I encourage everybody listening to this podcast to not only show up at Sunday, but to take a look in your local community and give support to those changes that could help accelerate this revolution.
If Utah can do it, that bastion of progressive policy, the rest of us should be able to catch up.
We began with talking about the end of nature. And what we saw was in that book, what you showed is the extraordinary and impact of human beings in which we were unweaving, we were tearing apart the fabric of nature that has co-evolved in such an extraordinary way. Christopher Alexander has a wonderful quote, which is, "Making wholeness heals the maker." And what you're describing is the beginning, I think, of the way that we can make more wholeness in our communities, that we can take at least one of our systems, our energy system. We need to do it with our food system and many others, but bring back wholeness. So I'd like to hear from you. And this is something that you're also doing with your advocacy organizations, but your view about how we as individuals can become wholeness makers.
Well, I think that's a beautiful way of putting it. I can't add an enormous amount to that, except to say, it strikes me that beauty is a deeply underrated part of this equation. I stole the title for this book, obviously, from George Harrison, and then was really pleased to find when I went to look at Spotify that Here Comes the Sun is by far the most streamed song in the Beatles' vast catalog. Twice as often people are clicking to listen to it as Hey Jude or Let It Be or other wonderful tunes. And I think the reason is that there's something very human, especially in a dark moment like the one we're in now, about that gentle and optimistic tune. A human that doesn't smile when the sun comes out from behind a cloud and hits their shoulders, I doubt it. It's probably the deepest connection to the natural world and the oldest that we have. My deepest, most immediate hope is that this helps with the greatest crisis humans have ever stumbled into. And I hope that it's economically liberating for large numbers of human beings. And I hope that it helps counter the authoritarianism that we're now afflicted with. But I also hope that it serves to heal a little bit of that division from the natural world that I lamented all those years ago in The End of Nature. That we'll be able to look up into the daytime sky, don't stare directly at the sun, please, and just feel its embrace in all kinds of ways.
Bill, thank you. That's a beautiful way to end. But your work continues. Thank you so much for it, and I encourage everybody to show up on Sunday.
Sunday.earth to find out where to go. Jonathan, thank you so much for all your enormous good work over so many years. It's truly appreciated.
Great, Bill. Hope to see you soon.
All right, take care.
Thank you to our guest, Bill McKibben. The Common Good is a production of the Garrison Institute and is hosted by me, Jonathan F.P. Rose. We'd love to hear your thoughts about the podcast. Please send us a note at podcasts@garrisoninstitute.org and let us know what you think. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a positive review on Apple Podcasts. This show is produced by the Garrison Institute with production and marketing from The Podglomerate. Its theme music was composed by Jonathan F.P. Rose and performed by Jog Blues. We look forward to being with you again soon.